So this morning, we're going to do something we do every now and then called open interviews, and it's very similar to what happens in the interview room, the hojo, where people come in, sit, and we do some kind of personal discussion, or I respond to questions and so on. So sometimes we have asked for some volunteers to come and do open interviews it's a strong tradition in Hindu tradition and Buddhist path also. So we have someone coming up, Sokuzan. So she'll ask questions and I'll say, I don't know. We'll just go on like that. I'm going to take my stick just in case you say something I don't care for.
I have a question from Dogen.
Yes.
That is trying to go deeper into some things I was asking yesterday.
A little louder, please.
This is a question from
Dogen Zenji.
Yeah, it's from the fascicle Undivided Activity.
And so Dogen is a founder of Soto lineage, for those of you who don't know that. Go ahead.
So this is in the middle of the fascicle. And it uses the word birth, and I've heard Dogen say that he uses birth synonymously with life.
Yes.
So it reads, birth is just like riding in a boat. You raise the sails and you steer. Although you maneuver the sail and the pole, the boat gives you a ride. And without the boat, you couldn't ride. But you ride in the boat, and your riding makes the boat what it is. Investigate a moment such as this. So the question on that is if they're using the analogy of life and the illusion of controlling the sails and the pole and sailing the boat.
Mm-hmm.
You teach that things are choiceless and just observe. But when we're riding in the boat, is there any way that we can change our attitude or have the power to do that?
Look at the ropes when you pull up the sail. Look closely at the rope. Look closely at the hands. Don't miss anything. Give everything your attention. Everything. Don't miss anything. No comment. Don't say, well, that's not necessary. I just need to focus on the sail and the weather and the shoreline. More?
When we're living our life, we're sailing the boat, in the midst of it, should we take an attitude or in verbal form to work with difficulty?
Yes. Everything is transformed into wisdom if you vow to save all beings, to be with all things. Just be with it. Whatever arises, every thought that arises in your mind is a being. Don't obstruct that being, that thought flotation. Don't obstruct it. Don't agree with it. Don't look away. Don't shut it down. Be with all things. Everything that comes to you, gods and demons, same. Don't separate anything. If you do, then we're right back to, then we're fighting over the fence with the neighbors. We're arguing with well, you don't argue with your dog, but some people do. Argue with your dog. So, in other words, don't set up boundaries that then you've got to defend. Walls of the mind, like it says in the Heart Sutra. Don't set up boundaries. Go ahead.
So you said don't separate. What's separating?
Thinking that there's something else, or analyzing anything. I'm not saying we shouldn't use some analysis, but it should come out of the awareness rather than our desire to win or get ahead or not lose or look good or whatever the motivation is around that. Go ahead.
So if we're not separate, then trimming the sails or riding the boat or living this life, Who has the power? What is personal power?
I don't know. What do you think it is?
I don't know.
That's why you're asking me?
Yeah,
What if I said I don't know?
I don't know.
So, well, personal power, I think, is a little bit, you can do a little bit, but there's so much power, there's so much energy and force behind just your birth that is completely undiscoverable. I like the image I often use is the tributaries that come down, that bring us to the mouth of the Amazon, the open, still, floating situation where things are just moving. That situation comes from countless numbers of little tiny pieces of power. In other words, moving down out of the mountains and joining together. And to try to trace those back, you can't do that. You have something to say. You have something to ask.
Yes.
What is it?
So you're riding in the boat, and let's say the weather changes all of a sudden, and you have to trim the sails, or
Yes.
you're going to tip over. But if you just sit and observe and watch everything flop around,
That's a comment. You're interpreting. You're adding to something is happening, and you're adding flopping around to it. Did you see that? Do you do that much?
maybe. I don't know.
You don't know? You want me to help you?
Sure.
You're saying flopping around all the time. You're always adding to everything that happens. Disagree with me.
No, I'm not.
It would have worked better had you done, instead of just halfway, if you'd have done both of them. Yes, you are. And it's the idea of not stopping that. It's the idea of seeing the way in which you do that so that you can bring awareness into that so that that can actually do what it needs to do without objecting to anything, agreeing with anything, or shutting down on anything. Those are the three poisons of passion, aggression, and ignorance. It seems to be necessary for us to observe those and watch those so that our own personal agenda about everything begins to dissolve, other than the vow to save all beings. You're a monk, you're a fully ordained monk. Your life is not your own anymore, it belongs to everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Next victim. Pardon me.
You often say to trust yourself.
I do.
Lately, it feels that I second guess my natural interactions with other people. What does it look like to trust myself in the midst of doubt?
Quite often what happens, and I'm not accusing you of anything, when we have doubt, instead of it's just that, back out, instead of backing out of the labeling we call doubt for a particular feeling or emotion or thought, instead we add on to it. I shouldn't be feeling this way. There must be something wrong. And all the other commentaries that arise when, from the point of view of a meditator, the idea is to not come to conclusion about I shouldn't be, this shouldn't, I shouldn't, it must be wrong, I must be doing something wrong, rather than just include the doubt. The doubt is not something separate from you that happens to you. You are the doubt. More.
What if I doubt the doubt?
Give yourself a spanking. No, I mean, you can, I follow you. What if I doubt the doubt? I can see where, but it's just kind of like double think.
Is there a way to pull the energy back from that?
Sit a lot. How much do you sit every day?
It depends.
How much do you sit every week?
20, 25 hours.
25 hours of sitting meditation facing a wall? That's probably enough. You're afraid I was So you need to sit a lot. Everyone, if you're sitting half an hour a day, it's nothing wrong with that, but it probably needs to. Our whole life, our whole 24 hours a day is constantly used up, and you're exercising the grasping, the rejecting, and the shutting down muscle all the time. Sit down and exercise the awareness muscle, which does what? Just observe. Go ahead.
How does sitting help to pull away some of the energy from the second guessing myself?
It may not pull away the energy, so there's no guarantee, but it will make it more and more apparent or clear the depth and the structure of that whole situation. So you'll see, you might not be able to go write a book about it. You might not be able to delineate that when you're talking to someone else about it. And it's, I would say it's even better not to discuss that with anyone. Discuss it with me. I'm your mentor, your teacher. You should discuss it. But I wouldn't discuss it too much with anyone else. Oh, you could say I feel like crap. That's okay. You see how that is? When we do that, we start to substitute the words and phrases for the actual texture. We start to cover up the raw feeling of having difficulty with our ideas about it and the way we're describing it.
Is not particularly feeling trustworthy of what naturally comes out, is that still being genuine?
Yes.
What is the fear that I'm not being genuine?
Actually, that's being genuine. As long as you don't add to it, don't do anything with it. You're gonna stub your toes. You're gonna step on sharp objects as you tread the path. We're not trying to change the path into an escalator. We're trying to work with things as they arise. So those kind of feelings and emotions just include them. They're not signs that you're doing something wrong. They're just signs that you're living, and the expression of your Buddha nature is coming through and receiving a physical form. You're embodied. Buddha nature is embodied in a very simple relative form called human being.
When you say don't do anything unless you have to, I tend to think about that in terms of more gross actions or grandiose actions. Like, don't go to the mall unless you have to or something. I don't know.
Unless you're out of potato chips.
Unless you're out of potato chips. But how can we practice that in a more subtle way, like what you were talking about? You don't have to add to a thought, or don't have to believe a thought.
So it seems to be helpful to, the other thing that I say is give everything your attention. It helps that if you can give everything your attention, then you can see in a very subtle way, the way in which you continue to add on to cover things up. Add on to passion, take away from it, judge, aggression, or shut down on, or dismiss, or distract yourself from, which is ignorance. So if you're giving everything your attention, every time you move your hand, you know that you're doing it. It's not about saying, I shouldn't be moving my hand. It's not about a right or wrong situation. It's more seeing what's going on. And if you don't add on to anything, then your mind is not full of a lot of extra elaborations. It's just completely being flooded with everything that's happening. Right now I'm watching her hands move and that pen move at the same time I'm watching you, and I'm seeing that there's not much movement going on. Well, some feet are moving. So it doesn't mean that this is some kind of a test, or you seeing everything that's happening. I'm not saying that. It's just the attitude of including tends to, it's kind of like, to use the metaphor of a changing gears kind of thing. It's like you've just kind of gone into neutral, so that you're more, everything else holds sway rather than your own mental fabrications and elaborations, or the chattering. That probably will not slow down unless you spend a lot of time, as you're doing. 25 hours a week is quite a bit of sitting meditation. You're not lying to me, are you?
I don't think so.
You got a watch?
Yeah.
Yep. She's sitting that much? You would disagree? You're the So again, it's really up to you. If you were sitting less than that, there's nothing wrong with it. Everything is happening. Everything is dependently arisen. So the idea here is to, I think if you sat every single time, you'd be sitting about 36 hours or so. There's it's low 30s. So this is a monastery. It's not something else. It's a monastery. So we have really intense training here, if you want to do it. And the people who live here, as some of you know, are required to sit as much of that schedule as they can. 25 hours is quite a bit when you consider that Junshu also has a job, not only away from here, but also has jobs within the monastery. But it seems necessary to sit down, hold still, watch what moves. I'm not saying there aren't just literally dozens, probably hundreds of different ways of training the mind with all the different traditions. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha began this particular Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, this particular lineage of teaching. And there's been all kinds of interpretations because it is a cumulative tradition. So therefore you can, if you go to Grand Rapids, you go to Detroit, or go to any place else, there's another Sangha. There's not only another way of looking or addressing or presenting the Buddha's teachings, but there's different, just all kinds of elaborations and techniques and so on. And that's why, one of the reasons why, having been exposed to quite a bit of that myself through my teachers, I keep it very simple. A lot of hours, don't do much. Sit down, hold still. Everyone's Buddha nature is also already available. It's just a matter of seeing it. And a lot of times the path to seeing that involves facing a lot of difficulty that you don't do anything with. If you're headed for where's that one place in Canada? Nova Scotia. If you're headed for Nova Scotia, and every time you run into problems, you stop and wrestle around with stuff and argue with the signpost and argue with the bumps in the road, like that, then you just need to include them. That's just part of the path. Just continue to go. Anything that happens to you is absolutely correct. Any karma, or whatever you want to call it, that comes to you, you're not getting a raw deal from anything. And everything that's happening is happening because of causes and conditions. The amazing thing about it is once you see this, then you can begin to liberate yourself from that situation by seeing your true nature is not separate from the Buddha, the awakened one. He was smiling, so I figured he probably saw where I just made a mistake. Did I make a mistake?
Never.
Never.
My nose is brown.
Your nose. Mine's long. Further questions? 33. That's what it adds up to if you sat all the time. And 3 and 3 is 6. So that's kind of some kind of mystical thing. But, yeah. Someone else would like to come up and ask a question? Welcome. Come on, David. Or Brad, I should say. I called David Brad yesterday. I think I knew him as Brad in a past life. So what seems to be the problem?
The fourth reminder.
Oh, the fourth reminder.
Part of it.
Can you cite it?
There's a part I can read. To be sure, I could recite it. I wrote it down first.
Good idea. That's why you have a degree in philosophy, business administration.
Yeah, political, public.
All that stuff. Yeah.
All that stuff.
All right. What is it?
The part that says, just like the feast before the executioner leads you to your death, I will cut desire and attachment and attain enlightenment through exertion.
Yes.
What is the feast part of that?
I think what's being addressed. These are the 4 reminders that that had to do with the precious human birth, with impermanence, with karma, and one he's talking about is the 4th one, which is to do with suffering. And he's talking about the imagery that's used there. Before the executioner leads you to your death, cut. How does it go?
Cut desire
and attachment. And so the feast is just everything is going fine. You're doing everything is good. You just got on a promotion. You're everything is good. So I think it's the images there is because of the contrast. We think we're doing so good. We're alive. We're here. Our health is good, or maybe not so good, or our health is getting better, or our children are doing well, or as I said, we just got a raise. So it's kind of a feast. Everything is great. And then all of a sudden, because of impermanence, things go flop. And then everything, maybe someone really close to you that you depend on, love, and everything dies. So everything just goes to pieces. And it's every transition, every time you have a thought, it's a birth and a death, and a birth and a death. We're being born and dying moment by moment by moment. So further question about that?
How does the birth and death enhance, looking at that, how does that enhance practice?
Because you start to realize how completely impermanent everything is. Nothing lasts. Even the most intense suffering will not last, but it will be extended if you fight with it. Sometimes difficulty is extended for long, long stretches of time because we object to it. It's called warfare. We object to it in ourselves. We object to it out in the world. But if we do nothing with it, then other people around you might call you names because you're a coward or something like that. But that's based on their projections, not on what's happening with you in your life. And then to go a little further, cutting desire and attachment doesn't mean you're actually cutting desire and attachment. What happens if you see the way way desire and attachment works fundamentally, cuts itself. You see it so clearly that you see that when you do something operating out of desire, that you're actually sticking your hand into fire. That's how clearly you see it. You're running into a burning house, which is a traditional image for samsara in Buddhism. Don't do that.
Is the exertion running into a burning house?
The exertion to what?
The last part says to attain enlightenment through exertion.
I think the exertion, the best way to say it is just train your mind, rather than be some kind of image like that. Running into the burning house is someone who's not training their mind. They're dependent on cause and effect, and they're hoping for good things and fearing bad things. Most people operate that way. Children operate that way, and then if they have the good fortune to be around adults who are able to help them, they can train them and encourage them to not necessarily go in that particular direction.
What is being an adult in terms of practice?
I'm
sorry.
being an adult in terms of practice. So it would be basically, to put it very literally, not caving into passion, aggression, and ignorance, even though it arises, not caving into jealousy as something like you're right and the other person's wrong, and being very clear about your petty mind, petty thought patterns about everybody. We see them all the time. You can't walk through a room full of people without projecting onto them. You may not believe it. You may project and then say, well, it's not really true. Or you might your ability to see through your own projections might be so powerful that there wouldn't be any comment. You fundamentally know that it's not true. And when that situation begins to happen, you could have all kinds of negativity looking to be transformed. All kinds of demons might be knocking on your door. I see you're helping everything else. Well, how about helping me? I just answered a question you didn't ask.
Is there projections included in the feast?
Sure. It's just used as a metaphor for something. Really, things are really great. It actually addresses the three types of suffering. The first is the pain of pain, which we all know about. That hurts. And the pain of the last one is the pain of the composite, which means that all compounded things, which we are appearing this way, will come apart, vanish, die. That's all pervasive. There's nobody lives forever. And then the middle one, which is being addressed there, is the pain of alternation. The pain of alternation is everything's really good. The traditional example for that is like a feast. You're at a wedding, and suddenly the veranda, that there's 20 guests out on the veranda all celebrating and raising their glasses and celebrating, and because of poor construction it collapses and they pass away. So that's pain of alternation. That's one of them. There's different ways of looking at that. There's the fear that things are going to change. Things are really great, that's not going to last. It's like half a bowl of ice cream. Still ice cream, still tastes good, it's almost gone. That's my example.
What holds the composite together while it lasts?
Who says it's held together?
What is the appearance of it being held together?
Exactly. Thank you. It's just appearance. It just looks like something's happening. This is an illusion. This is an extension. Your actual dream at night is more real than this, because that dream can't be destroyed. This one can be. You can't destroy something that is unreal. Cool, huh?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We have some time if somebody else wants to come on.
Can I ask a question about?
Certainly, yeah.
I'm a beginner with
Yeah.
Buddhism, so I have a question about physical pain.
Yes.
I have had for a very long time musculoskeletal issues, and sitting. In fact, I almost had to walk out several times from the service today. Sitting
Sure.
is excruciatingly painful.
Yeah. You sit in a chair?
I did sit in the chair. It doesn't
Okay.
help. It's the upright. It's standing and sitting in general. Causes
Okay.
me great pain.
You know
Just
what?
the upright position.
Do you know what the physiological situation is?
I've been in and out of doctors and physical therapists. It's a complex situation to explain, and
Okay, yeah.
that they don't offer where I live.
But there is something going on that's physiological.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, how do you deal with pain when you're trying to sit and that's
Yeah.
the thing that's kind of taking over your
So,
entire
what was your name?
Marianne.
Marianne. So, something that's often missed is the most important thing about training the mind, body-mind complex, this whole situation, is silence and stillness. So find a way to find whatever position that may be, and maybe laying down.
Yeah, that's often what I do.
So when you do that, hold as still as you can and just observe what moves. So if you can do a little bit facing the wall, just even a short period of time, even a minute or 2 minutes, and then transition to something more comfortable, and then come back to facing the wall. Slowly bring yourself back to the wall, just to the sitting posture like this over and over again, and see if your body won't respond to that moving back and holding still. So it's about the stillness, and it's about the setting. You're setting up you could say artificial, but it's really not an artificial contrast between you're holding very still so you can see that dimension of the mind that is much, much deeper, and is much more obvious if you're moving your hand just like talking like this, you're totally in this three-dimensional space. But if you stop moving everything and leave all the senses open over time, and it might be quite a bit of time, you will eventually start to see the information or the karma or the deep structure of your own particular life and what that's all about. Probably even get in touch more with your physiological situation. There's no guarantees of that, but body, mind are not separate. They just look like it. And so what we do is we kind of artificially separate that through sitting practice of meditation. So I would say if you can find a way to hold still, even for short periods of time, and just observe what moves. Usually it's just thought patterns coming and going, or memories or evaluations, or thoughts about your body and how it's feeling. That'll take you in many, many circles around and around. More?
I'm not sure actually. Because I'm trying to think about the only exposure that I've had to Buddhism so far has been Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's a lot about the breath. He brings everything back to the breath, back to the breath, and that's kind of what I've been practicing on my own up to this point. And I find that is soothing to some degree. But when I was sitting here and trying to, I didn't have a wall, I had a window, but
window
looking
sign.
at the tree. Even bringing that in, I noticed it lessen the pain a little bit, but it still doesn't. I guess my fear is that the pain will never go away, and I won't be able to sit.
Might not.
Yeah.
So I don't. I have, with all respect for Thich Nhat Hanh, I don't teach that. I actually taught the following the breath technique for close to 3 decades. I was taught that myself by my teachers a long time ago. I don't do that anymore, and the reason I don't do that is difficult to explain. But to put it very simply, it creates a meditator. It creates an identity of someone who can meditate, and it doesn't allow you to go into your own personal causes and conditions. The not doing anything, shikantaza, is an advanced technique, and it's not easy to do. It takes a connection with a teacher, a connection with a sangha. It takes an environment to be able to practice that in. And Thich Nhat Hanh has his people that are love him and practice under him, and they're helped by him. So I'm not objecting to what he's doing. It's just I don't do it.
I like him a lot. So
well, he's a cute guy. He really is. He's
I
just
find him really for my particular life. He's been incredible.
Well, then you should do whatever is helpful to you.
And I'm trying to I'm learning. I'm kind of branching out, checking.
Yeah.
Out.
Well, you're welcome. Do you live in the area? I think.
I'm visiting the area. I might be moving.
So if you do come to the area, you can come here and practice sitting meditation. You never have to, if you can be a student of Thich Nhat Hanh's forever and still use this space to practice in. Most important thing is to practice. There's no club here to join. There's not even any membership. So that's extra. We don't do that. So anything else? Okay, thank you. Any further?
I have a question.
Certainly.
So where we live, we are often, our goal is to review our personality and look at our personality and to change it.
Yes.
And so by identifying things that I would like to change about my personality, or the way that I cope with things or do things, is that meddling?
So what we're doing is, there's lots of ways, as I said earlier, lots of ways of working with the mind. And meditation is, I'm very biased in this area. I think you should train your mind, but I don't know. We have our own lives, and people go different directions with different ideas about doing that. And you're talking about moral inventory, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so quite often in rehab situations, they'll use moral inventory or a cognitive behavioral because they're really trying to change something they think is real, which is the ego, trying to make it a healthy ego. And what we're doing here is we're trying to see reality, actually what that actually is. And that's, to ego, that's a little frightening. Ego would rather turn around and let's go back and let's just figure things out, much more reasonable. So, and my position, if I have one on that, is you should trust yourself. If this is helpful to you and it relieves some of your suffering or difficulty, it helps you feel like your life is more workable, you can more work with the issues in your life that are challenging or difficult or upset things, then you should do that. I mean, I think it would be good to include some awareness practice in there. But I wouldn't disagree with that because it's not helpful to do that. I'm not here to argue about something. But so it's not, if you were a student of mine, you know, you're a formal student and you'd ask me to function as your teacher, I probably would have you stop doing that. So, but it doesn't mean you should stop. Don't misunderstand.
Right.
You should continue to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So I have a question. So along with Kozan's example of being on the boat, thank you, and senses are open.
Again?
So if senses are open,
Yes.
and I'm paying attention to the rope,
Yes.
what is fixation on the rope? So in fixation on the rope,
It could operate out of lots of things. It could operate just out of ignorance, not wanting to see anything else. I got something here. It's my reference point. I'm just going to stay with this. This works. I'm staying right here. I don't want any scary things coming in out of the woods across the lake. So it's that kind of a, you know, it's a sophisticated form of ignorance called distraction. And we'll even we get very inventive about our distraction. Sometimes you can even turn it into a philosophy and write books on it, ways to be distracted. Like, I'm okay, you're okay, those kinds of distractions. So it doesn't make them wrong, it makes that they're just working with relative truth in a different way. Maybe sophisticated, may work well, may not, may work for a little while. And then I think it's good to bring as much awareness to everything as we can so that we can see more closely how we're being distracted. So it's not about getting rid of the distraction. This is why the sitting practice of meditation, if it's done extensively over long periods of time, eventually that pretty hard to distract yourself from anything if there's a lot of awareness going on. A lot of awareness is really prioritized. It's like the image I often use is, instead of being so focused on the clouds and the weather in the sky, if we have any focus at all, it's on the sky. So sometimes it's even said, mind like the sky. And that way the clouds can do whatever they want. More.
so I don't know if this relates exactly, but another question if you don't mind.
Certainly not.
Is it possible to be with a person or an experience in the same way that we are with the wall?
Yeah, I follow you. Probably only if they're dead. Not funny? Yeah. So what I'm saying is if they're just not there, if they're there and they're, you know, we have to meet them where they're at, and if they're having trouble, then we're going to have trouble. It's not about staying away and staying aloof and being some kind of a, you know, made of stone where we're not affected by emotions. No, it's more like being with whatever's arising. It's called compassion, and it has to come out of your awareness and out of your heart and not out of your head or your gut. It has to come out of a place that doesn't think. This doesn't think. This is a fraidy cat down here. And this is, huh?
I'm sorry.
No, you.
So are we not doing that when we're sitting with the wall?
Doing what?
Practicing compassion, sitting, feeling with all of that. Because
Somewhat.
A lot comes up while we're sitting.
The idea is you're sitting, instruction is just watch what moves. And don't add on to anything, don't do any math at all, sit, watch what moves. if you're following your breath, it's not that that's wrong. That will tend to pacify you for a while and make you feel better. But it's not about feeling good. It's about seeing what the basic situation is. It's like if you have a problem and you find a way to just make everything feel okay, then the problem is still there. And the way you know it's there is when the world when part of your world starts to break up and fall apart, suddenly all of that hidden passion, aggression, and ignorance that you've been able to cover over with following your breath or creating some kind of a strong meditator situation tends to come apart. It's just been my experience. That's what happens, and I have a bunch of it. Experience, that is. And so that's how it looks. So that's why I've slowly even though I was trained to teach that way in 1978, I just don't do that anymore because I don't think it's fundamentally helpful. More? I didn't even answer your question. You should have more.
That's why I'm wondering. So if it's okay, I'll re-ask.
Well, of course. Is that a re-ask?
Sitting.
Re-ask? Yeah, that's a word. Go ahead.
So sitting in front of the wall, senses are open.
Yes.
Sitting in front of you.
Yes.
So the practice is senses are open.
Yes.
Is sitting, I think my question is now, I'm not exactly sure, but I believe it is,
Yeah.
Is sitting at the wall practice in some ways for being present, as they say, I don't know what word you would use, to another person?
Oh, yes, it would be. But you can't practice just sitting in front of another person. You could in front of a teacher, if the teacher will hold still that long. You could.
I mean, when they're flailing,
yeah,
like my mind is flailing at the wall.
That's fine. You should watch it. You just sit and watch your mind flail. There really isn't anybody but you. Everything else is a projection of you. You know, it's just a simple way of saying it. I'm not saying there aren't other people, but we tend to project onto people so heavily we can't actually see. Like have you ever noticed some people talk to you and they're talking to their idea of you? And they never really, it's almost like you could run away and they'd still be talking to the space that you were just in. Their projection on you is so intense. Quite often it's this or whatever. So we need to go to the next set. We're going to, why don't you explain it, Unyo?
We'll stand and meditate the merit in the back of our yellow templates, and then we have just a couple minutes to get ready for the day around gathering.
People are welcome to stay if they would like.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho-san shi-shi-fu, shi-son-gu-san-go-ku-san, wo-ko-ho-ja-ho-ro-mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Ajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.